During the rise and dominion of the Tibetan Empire, three rulers are particularly praised for their establishment of Buddhism in the region. Known as the Dharma kings, or the Three Great Kings, they played a crucial role in the formation of Tibetan Buddhism and in fostering the success of the Tibetan Empire. Of all the Tibetan royal rulers, these three played a particularly significant role. To learn more, keep watching as we closely examine the three great kings of Tibet. The first great king was Songtsen Gampo, known as the forefather of Tibetan Buddhism. Songtsen Gampo was also the founder of the Tibetan Empire. He was the 33rd Tibetan king of the Yarlung dynasty and came to power in the first half of the 7th century. At this time, Bon was the dominant religion in Tibet, which was a system of shamanistic and animistic practices. It focused on demonic forces and was largely magic-related. As time progressed, elements of Bon impacted the newly imported religion of Buddhism and left a lasting impression on the religion, giving Tibetan Buddhism some distinct features. Some aspects of Bon that can be seen in Tibetan Buddhism include cosmological perspectives, as well as unique rituals and practices. Songtsen Gampo was a successful military leader, and his forays into Nepal and China brought him into contact with neighboring cultures. He sincerely appreciated his territorial enemies and studied Chinese and Buddhist scripture. Songtsen Gampo married a princess from each nation to strengthen the ties between China and Nepal, and the two women brought artifacts and literature on various subjects, including Buddhism. The Chinese princess of the Tang dynasty, Princess Wangcheng, was still in her early teens when she traveled across the steppe to marry Songtsen Gampo. She brought a trove of skills and knowledge, including new agricultural methods, the latest scientific advancements, and medical texts. She is credited with teaching the Tibetan people advanced farming, weaving, and winemaking techniques, and expanding Tibetan culture with art, music, and sculpture. Many Buddhists hold her to be a manifestation of a female bodhisattva known as White Tara, who is associated with maternal compassion and healing. Songtsen Gampo's other bride was Princess Prakuti, who is believed to have been the daughter of the Lichavi Empire of Nepal. She was a devout Buddhist and brought Nepalese Buddhist ideas to Tibet. Like Wangcheng, Prakuti brought with her many important texts in iconography. Although the historical facts about Prakuti are scarce, she is highly thought of in Tibet and considered to be an incarnation of Green Tara, considered by some to be the original Tara and consort of one of the self-born Buddhas. The brides each brought with them a Buddhist statue. Wangcheng brought a statue of Jo-o Shakyamuni, while Prakuti brought the Jo-o Mikyodorje statue, both of which are now enshrined at Jokang Temple. At the start of Songtsen Gampo's reign, Tibet had yet to develop a written language, so there could be no Tibetan translations of Buddhist scriptures. To create a Tibetan alphabet and script, Songtsen Gampo sent several men, including the Tibetan scholar Tonmi Sambota, to India to study and research scripts and create one for the Tibetan language. The group of scholars traveled to India via Nepal, where they received medicines in exchange for gifts. They traveled all over India to find a suitable teacher, eventually meeting Brahmin Li Qinglu and a group of other teachers who helped the Tibetans study grammar, lexicography, and literature. After 7 years, the Tibetan scholars returned to Tibet with gifts and texts from the Indian king, said to be the first Buddhist text to arrive in Tibet from India. By the end of his reign, Songtsen Gampo had established the Tibetan written language and sowed the seeds of Buddhism within his empire, paving the way for the future Dharma kings. Tibetan Buddhists now consider him to be an early manifestation of the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of infinite compassion and mercy. The second Dharma king of Tibet was Trisong Detsen. He is arguably the most famous of the three great kings and ruled in the latter half of the 8th century CE. By this time, the Tibetan royalty had developed an interest in Buddhism, possibly due to Empress Jincheng, a Han Dynasty Buddhist and the wife of Trisong Detsen's father, Emperor Me Aksum. However, there was a power struggle, leading to Me Aksum's assassination. A 6-year suppression of Buddhism followed. Trisong Detsen had ascended to the throne in his early teens, but by around 20, he had fully converted to Buddhism. He had shown an interest in Buddhism from an early age, and this interest partially prompted his father to send a delegation to travel to Tang China and retrieve Buddhist texts. This delegation encouraged Trisong Detsen to study Buddhism further. Trisong Detsen became determined to orchestrate a resurgence of Buddhism in Tibet and sent a delegation to India to invite Indian Buddhist scholars to come to Tibet and teach. One of the scholars, or pandits, was an Indian Buddhist philosopher named Sita. According to legend, his first trip to Tibet was plagued by malicious local spirits, after which he spent some time in Nepal. He later returned and magically appeased the spirits, which allowed construction on the Samye Monastery to commence. Trisong Detsen is credited with building the Samye Monastery, considered by many to be the first true Buddhist monastery in Tibet. Trisong Detsen then installed Sita as the first abbot of Samye, cementing the establishment of the Indian version of Buddhism. Several Tibetans were then initiated as monks, and Trisong Detsen commissioned a considerable undertaking to translate the Buddhist scripts from Sanskrit to Tibetan. The decision to endorse Indian Buddhism over Chinese Buddhism was both cultural and political. Legend has it that he held debates at the Samye Monastery between Chinese and Indian scholars, after which Trisong Detsen gave his royal endorsement to Indian Buddhism and declared it to be the official religion of Tibet. Although Songtsen Gampo first introduced Buddhism, it had taken a downturn since the end of his reign. Trisong Detsen is seen as the father of Tibetan Buddhism, as he installed Indian Buddhism in the region instead of Chen or Nepalese Buddhism. Trisong Detsen had many wives and consorts, one being Yeshe Sogyal, known as the mother of Tibetan Buddhism. Much of Yeshe Sogyal's life is shrouded in myth, but she is still highly celebrated by Tibetan Buddhists today. She is said to have attained enlightenment and is credited with aiding in translating the Buddhist texts into Tibetan. However, Trisong Detsen not only fully established Buddhism in the country, he was also responsible for a resurgence of power. When Trisong Detsen ascended to the throne, the Tibetan Empire had lost many territories, including numerous cities in Turkestan. In addition, the Nepalese were in rebellion, and Arab forces expanded their influence along the western borders of Tibet. Trisong Detsen conducted various successful military campaigns against the Tang Chinese. He took over the Tang capital and forced Emperor Daizong to flee. Eventually, the two powers brokered a peace treaty that granted Tibet all the lands in the modern-day province of Qinghai. Trisong Detsen also expanded the empire to the west, reaching the Amu Darya and the region controlled by the Abbasid Caliph, Harun al-Rashid. Tibetan Buddhists now consider Trisong Detsen to have been a manifestation of Manjusri, the Bodhisattva of wisdom. The final of the three great kings was Ralpachen, the 41st king of the Yarlung dynasty, who ruled during the first half of the 9th century. He was initially named Trisong Detsen, but received the moniker Ralpachen due to his two long braids. The braids were long enough that when he was seated, he could place the end under seats to the left and right of his throne. The literal translation of Ralpachen is the man with long braids. Like his predecessors, Ralpachen was instrumental in allowing Buddhism to flourish and growing the empire, reaching its largest extent under his rule. During Ralpachen's reign, the Tibetan Empire included parts of China, India, and Nepal. His territorial expansion was achieved through military campaigns and political alliances. Ralpachen's military clashes with China culminated with the Tibetan-Chinese Treaty, commemorated with the Lhasa Treaty Pillar, which details an agreement in which both countries pledged to respect each other's borders. The pillar was built at the Jokang Monastery in Lhasa, the agreed border. Many historians cite this pillar as one of the oldest surviving examples of Tibetan text. In addition to expanding the borders of his empire, Ralpachen worked on the administration and infrastructure of Tibet. He introduced standard weights and measures based on the Chinese model to help trade. Ralpachen was a huge supporter of Tibetan Buddhism and commissioned the restoration and remodeling of many of Tibet's temples. He also built several temples during his reign, one of which was 9 stories tall, built at Yushangdo on the east bank of the lower Qiuchu or Lhasa River. It is said that the lower stories of the temple were made from stone, with the middle floors of brick and the top 3 tiers made of wood. Many sources cite that it was famous for its amazing golden roof. He also provided further translations of Sanskrit terms, developing Tibetan translations and literature. Among those texts that he commissioned translations for were the Triptaka, the commentaries, and ancient tantras. Ralpachen also helped supplement the lives of the Tibetan monks, enforcing Indian regulations for the clergy and organized priesthood classes. Some sources state that he assigned each monk 7 families that would provide revenue for the monk or face strict penalties for failing to do so. However, this is not wholly supported by historical texts. Ralpachen invited artisans and scholars from across the Tibetan Empire and beyond, particularly from China, Nepal, Kashmir, and the Kingdom of Khotan, to come to Tibet and share their skills and knowledge. Ralpachen's death is disputed and controversial. Most sources claim that he was murdered by his anti-Buddhist brother Dharma, or at least by two pro-Bon ministers who then installed his brother to the throne. This act heralded the end of the imperial patronage of Buddhism, leading to religious persecution, a civil war, and the dissolution of the Buddhist empire. However, other accounts suggest that Ralpachen had grown sick and was unable to take control of the affairs of the state before he died of his illness. In the Buddhist tradition, this third great king is seen as the incarnation of Vajrapani, the thunderbolt-bearing bodhisattva. How would you like to get a deeper understanding of history, impress your friends, and predict the future more accurately based on past events? If this sounds like something you might be into, then check out the brand new Captivating History Book Club by clicking the first link in the description. To learn more about the Tibetan Empire, check out our book, History of Tibet, a captivating guide to ancient kingdoms, the Tibetan Empire, Mongol invasions, Buddhism, Chinese rule, and modern times. It's available as an ebook, paperback, and audiobook. Also, grab your free mythology bundle ebook while it's still available. All links are in the description. If you found the video captivating, please hit the like button and subscribe for more videos like this.